Cities, the main conduits through which human ideas have evolved over the millennia, have served not only as centers of wealth and power, but also of world-changing cultural and artistic movements. Civilizations have risen and fallen around cities, and while the list of great leaders who came off the land from their farms to lead their countries stretches from Cincinnatus to George Washington, all of them, in the end, had to govern from a municipal center with a large population. What then are the greatest and most influential cities in world history? The places that were not only famed for their beauty and wealth, but are also known for their ideas and influence on the lives that we lead today. Before we explore our list of the most influential great cities in history, if you're interested in early access to videos and live chats with the creator of Intrigued Mind, consider subscribing to our Patreon. Your support will greatly help us keep the channel producing more intriguing content. Athens. The birthplace of so many of our modern concepts and irreplaceable values, it is hard to quantify the contribution of Athens to world history. The Athenian democracy was among the first major city-states to devolve power directly to its citizens, giving each one, at least in theory, an equal say in the government of their city. Though the voting franchise was open only to male citizens, perhaps just 30% of the population, when women and slaves were excluded, it was still a radical concept in its time, and for centuries afterward, true democracy was seen as a very strange mode of government. The word democracy comes from the Greek demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. We know so much about Athenian democracy because the city was also the home of the modern concept of historical writing. Following the Greek victory over the Persian Empire in the 5th century BC, in which Athens played a pivotal role, the Greek writer Herodotus decided that such a momentous victory should not be lost to the mists of time, and endeavored to record as much about the conflict as he could gather from the memories of those whose ancestors lived through the events. He called this work inquiry, the Greek word for which is historia, from which we take the word history. This approach differed from earlier records of events, which were, as the English philosopher Bertrand Russell noted, mere annals, as in simple lists of dates, places, and names. Herodotus filled his work with stories and geography, legends and biography, painting a huge canvas of Mediterranean life and culture as it existed 2,500 years ago. Many of the stories and events in Herodotus's history were replayed for the people of the city in Athens theater, and the works of playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides perfected the genres of comedy and drama that still dominate entertainment nowadays. This development was spurred by the prizes given out every year at the city's Dionysia, when playwrights were encouraged to submit their work for performance in worship of the god of wine and fertility. At around the same time this was happening, the city also gave birth to modern Western philosophy, with the method of questioning all knowledge introduced by Socrates, then recorded and expanded by his student Plato, and distilled into a more scientific system by Plato's student Aristotle. It is still called the Socratic method today. In addition to his own works, most of which were tragically lost to time, Aristotle was also tutor to the young Alexander of Macedon, who would go on to conquer all of Greece, the entire Persian Empire, and northern India, spreading the Hellenistic ideas and culture of Athens and the other Greek city-states across the known world. A little-known fact about Athens is that the city features what is likely the world's first meteorological station, the Tower of the Winds, which it was said was built by Andronicus of Cyrus in the 1st century BC. Along with the sundials that dot its 8 sides, its near 40-foot height was topped with a weather vane molded in the shape of the god Triton, as well as a water clock inside to tell the time, even in times of no sunlight. Rome. The Tower of the Winds was built before Athens' occupation and incorporation into the Roman state, which lasted from the end of 146 BCE until the fall of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire in 1453 at the hands of Sultan Mehmed II. After beginning as a kingship state in its Republican period, which lasted for roughly 5 centuries, Rome had many democratic features, such as the public vote, but it was never a true democracy like Athens. Nevertheless, its open policies of offering citizenship and allied status, even to cities it had conquered in war, along with its ferocious military culture, led it to building an empire unparalleled in ancient history. Roman culture spread far and wide during the peak of its power, and the establishment of military colonies for its retired legionaries all across Europe led to the recreation of miniature versions of the city and disseminated its customs even more permanently. Latin existed as a lingua franca and the European language of the educated up until the 15th and 16th centuries. And today, the languages of Italian, French, and Spanish, the second most widely spoken language in the world, all derive from Latin, totaling almost 1 billion native speakers. English, the third most widely spoken language, also contains many loanwords and roots from the Latin influence in its evolution. Roman law also served as the basis of European law codes through the medieval period and into the Renaissance and early modern eras, right up to the French Revolution, when Napoleon Bonaparte introduced his own civil code, consciously aping the Roman system. The Napoleonic Code was subsequently adapted in countries as far afield as the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Portugal, the French Empire in Africa and Asia, Chile, Ecuador, Uruguay, Bolivia, and Puerto Rico, as well as Quebec. With their new republic and senate on a Capitol Hill, built in the style of Roman temples, the founding fathers of the United States were also consciously trying to emulate the greatness of the city that had conquered the known world almost 2 millennia before. Engineering is another of the areas in which Roman influence on the modern world is most profound, and Roman innovations in road building, water management, and bridge building are evident everywhere that the city's empire raised its flag. Just one example of many, the Aqua Virgo aqueduct in Rome was completed in 19 BC and is still in use today, supplying the water for the Trevi Fountain, along with many of the city's other fountains and drinking outlets. Jerusalem. Jerusalem differs from the other cities on this list in that it was never a financial or imperial giant, but instead, its influence and greatness comes from its theological and cultural impact alone. Jerusalem is a center and sacred venue to all three of the monotheistic Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Taken together, the adherents of these three faiths account for more than 4 billion people, or more than half of the global population. As such, the ideas and laws formulated in the Talmud, the Old Testament, the Bible, and the Quran have likely affected world history more than any other human idea. Unfortunately, this divine status, as well as its position in the Central Levant, has made Jerusalem a battleground between empires almost since its founding in and around 1500 BC. But this has not dissuaded the pilgrims, more than 3 million of whom arrive in the city every year. When Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon, visited Jerusalem for the first time in 2012, he was quoted as saying, "I am more excited stepping on these stones than I was stepping on the moon." To give some idea of the city's importance as a religious center, Jerusalem is home to 500 synagogues, 50 churches, and over 30 mosques. London. First coming to historical fame as a Roman city following the conquest of Britain in the 1st century AD, Londinium, or London's status as the capital of Anglo-Saxon England, was assured by the time of the Norman conquest, and it retained this position throughout the High Medieval period. It began to increase in international status during the Tudor dynasty, as the beginnings of English colonies in the newly discovered Americas and Caribbean grew into a long-standing presence, and the city also benefited from the increasing trade and European conquest in India and the Far East. The city's wealth grew exponentially with the rise of the corporation, and its financial power was the deciding factor in the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte and the settlement of the European continent in the early 19th century. The next 100 years saw British power continue to expand, and by the outbreak of the First World War, the British Empire, with London at its heart, ruled fully a quarter of the surface of the earth and an equal amount of the world's economy. With the largest navy in history, Britain was also the world's largest creditor nation. Bearing the burden of 2 world wars broke this hegemony irreparably, but the global cultural influence of London continued from the 1960s onwards. The city of writers and thinkers like Shakespeare, Locke, Johnson, and Dickens, as well as scientists such as Bacon, Cavendish, Faraday, Turing, and Berners-Lee. London was also the adopted home of Karl Marx for fully a third of his life until his death at age 64 in 1883. Marx based much of his theories and writings on his observances of London and British life, his socialist framework forming the ideology of the modern People's Republic of China, as well as the former Soviet Union. New York. Eclipsing rivals like Chicago and Los Angeles, New York rose to prominence as the foremost city in what became known as the American Century. Its skyline of skyscrapers set the benchmark for other cities to emulate, with its architectural wonders like the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, Art Deco triumphs, both opening in 1930 and ushering in a new age of optimism that would sadly end too early with the onset of the Great Depression and the Second World War. New York Stock Exchange and the Wall Street District is the financial heart of the world's most powerful nation, and the greater New York and New Jersey areas have the largest gross domestic product by far of any other metropolitan area in the United States. To this financial influence can be added the cultural significance of the city's museums and art galleries, and New York is the home of the big 3 television networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC, which likely influenced and entertained more Americans in the pre-internet era than any other organizations. It is to New York that France gifted the Statue of Liberty in 1886, and following the establishment of the United Nations in 1945, the organization symbolically chose New York as its headquarters, conferring on it the status of a world capital in very real terms. This has been only a brief introduction into the wonders of some of the world's great cities. So, for more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.